At the center of this stood the Blackwood residence, a home that seemed to embody the American dream. From the outside, the Blackwoods appeared to be the very image of a perfect blended family. Terence Blackwood, a distinguished man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, had built a small empire in real estate development. His wife of 3 years, Lorley, was a former model whose grace and charm had seemingly not faded with age. Ivy, Terence's biological daughter from his first marriage, was a bright and ambitious college student, while Callum, Laura's son from her previous marriage, had recently graduated and was on the cusp of starting his own career. To their neighbors and friends, the Blackwoods represented success, unity, and the possibility of second chances. Terence and Laura's whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage had been the talk of Maple Grove, a beacon of hope for those who believed in love after loss. The integration of their children into a cohesive family unit seemed effortless, a testament to their parenting and the adaptability of youth. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated image of familial bliss, currents of tension and secrets ran deep. The walls of their house held whispers of unspoken truths, forbidden desires, and simmering resentments. Terence Blackwood's journey to the pinnacle of suburban success was paved with both triumph and tragedy. Foreign to working-class parents in Pittsburgh, he had clawed his way up the socio-economic ladder through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to spot lucrative real estate opportunities. By his mid-30s, Terence had established a company that would eventually reshape the skyline of several mid-sized Pennsylvania cities. His first marriage to Elizabeth, a college sweetheart, had been a partnership of equals. Together, they navigated the challenges of building a business while raising their daughter Ivy. Elizabeth's sudden death from an aneurysm when Ivy was just 12 had left Terence a widower, forcing him to balance his grief with the responsibilities of single parenthood and an expanding enterprise. For 5 years, Terence poured himself into work and fatherhood, his romantic life relegated to the back burner. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a charity gala that he met Laura Lavon, a woman whose allure would reignite his passion for life and love. Laura's path had been markedly different from Terence's. Discovered by a modeling scout at 16, she had graced runways and magazine covers throughout her 20s. Her marriage to photographer Julian Reeves had produced a son, Callum, but the union crumbled under the weight of Julian's infidelities and Laura's fading modeling career. Divorced at 35, Laura Lavon found herself navigating single motherhood and a world that seemed to value youth above all else. When Terence and Laura Lavon's worlds collided, it was as if the universe had decided to grant them both a second chance at happiness. Their courtship was swift and intense, culminating in a lavish wedding that was the social event of the year in Maple Grove. The newly formed Blackwood family moved into the house, ready to begin their life together. Ivy Blackwood, now 20 and studying psychology at a prestigious university, had initially struggled with her father's remarriage, fiercely intelligent and deeply loyal to her late mother's memory. Ivy approached her new family dynamic with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant acceptance. Over time, however, she found herself warming to Laura Lavon's genuine attempts at connection and the novel experience of having a brother figure in her life. Callum Reeves, 22 and freshly graduated with a degree in business, viewed his mother's marriage to Terence with a pragmatic eye. He appreciated the stability and opportunities that came with being part of the Blackwood family, even as he harbored ambitions of forging his own path in the business world. Charming and adaptable, Callum seemed to ease into his role as stepson and brother with natural grace as the family settled into their new dynamic. Outsiders marveled at how seamlessly they had blended. Terence and Laura Lavon were seen as pillars of the community, hosting charity events and involving themselves in local politics. Ivy and Callum's academic achievements were points of pride, held up as examples of the family's success. Yet behind closed doors, the careful balance of the Blackwood household teetered on a precarious edge. Unspoken Desires, hidden resentments and the weight of expectations created an atmosphere ripe for upheaval. As the summer heat intensified, so too did the tensions, building towards a crescendo that would shatter the illusion of their perfect life. July 15, 2023, dawned bright and oppressively humid. In Maple Grove, the Blackwood household stirred to life with its usual morning rhythms. Unaware that by nightfall, their lives would be irrevocably altered. Terence rose early, his mind already racing with the day's agenda. A crucial meeting with investors was scheduled for the afternoon, potentially opening doors for Blackwood Development's most ambitious project yet. As he nodded his tie with practiced precision, Laura Lavon entered their in-suit bathroom, her silk robe whispering against her skin. "Morning, darling," Laura Lavon murmured, pressing a kiss to Terence's cheek. "Any plans for dinner tonight?" "I was thinking we could try that new Italian place in town." Terence's reflection frowned slightly in the mirror. "I'm not sure when I'll be back," he replied. "This meeting could run late." "Don't wait up for me." Laura Lavon smiled, faltered for a moment before she recovered, years of modeling having trained her to maintain a pleasant facade. "Of course," she said lightly. "Another time then." Downstairs, Ivy hunched over a bowl of cereal, her eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled through social media. She barely glanced up as her father entered the kitchen, grunting a perfunctory good morning. Callum, ever the early riser, had already left for his internship at a local marketing firm. His absence was noted by Terence, who had been hoping to discuss some potential business connections that could benefit his stepson's budding career. As Terence gathered his briefcase and car keys, he paused to kiss Laura Lavon goodbye. With that he was gone, the sound of his car engine fading as he drove away. The day progressed without incident. Ivy left for her summer job at the local library, while Laura Lee busied herself with household tasks and preparations for an upcoming charity event. The house settled into a quiet lull, the calm before an impending storm. It was just past 3 p.m. when Terence's car unexpectedly pulled into the driveway. His meeting had concluded early, a rare occurrence that left him with mixed feelings of triumphant unease. The deal had been secured faster than anticipated, leaving him with an unfamiliar stretch of free time. As he entered the house, the silence struck him as odd. Laura Lavon's car was gone, likely out running errands. Terence loosened his tie, deciding to use this unexpected free time to relax before sharing the good news with his family. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he climbed the stairs, intent on changing into more comfortable clothes. As he approached the upper landing, a muffled sound caught his attention. It came from Ivy's room, a mix of whispers and what sounded unsettlingly like stifled laughter. Concern and curiosity warded within Terence as he approached the door. He raised his hand to knock, but something held him back. The whispers grew more distinct, and with a jolt, Terence realized there were two voices, one unmistakably male. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the doorknob. In the split second before he turned it, a part of Terence's mind screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to preserve the sanctity of trust between father and daughter, but that voice was drowned out by a rising tide of parental concern and an irrational surge of anger at the thought of some boy in his daughter's room. The door swung open, time seemed to freeze as Terence's mind struggled to process the scene before him. On Ivy's bed lay his daughter and stepson, their entangled limbs in state of undress, leaving no doubt as to the nature of their activities. For a heartbeat, the tableau held Terence in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and dawning rage. Ivy and Callum, their eyes wide with fear and guilt, scrambling to cover themselves, then like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. Terence's world narrowed to a pinpoint of fury and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he thundered, his eyes darting between Ivy and Callum, who were frantically pulling on discarded clothing. But Terence was beyond explanations. He rounded on Callum, who stood frozen. "You," he snarled, jabbing a finger at his stepson's chest. "How dare you, in my house with my daughter?" With a roar of incoherent rage, Terence lunged at Callum, his hands closing around the young man's throat. They stumbled backwards, crashing into Ivy's desk, sending books and ornaments clattering to the floor. Ivy screamed, pleading with her father to stop, but her words fell on deaf ears. Terence's world had contracted to this single act of violence, his fingers tightening as Callum's face turned an alarming shade of purple. In desperation, Callum's hand scrambled across the desk, closing around a heavy crystal paperweight. With the last of his strength, he brought it crashing against the side of his stepfather's head. Terence's grip loosened as he staggered, blood streaming from the gash on his temple, but the blow had only served to further enrage him. He tackled Callum to the ground. The two men grappled on the floor, a frenzied tangle of limbs and fury. In the chaotic struggle, Terence's hand closed once more around Callum's throat, flying with rage and bleeding profusely. He squeezed with all his might. Callum's struggles grew weaker, his eyes bulging as he gasped for air that wouldn't come. Ivy's screams faded to background noise as Terence poured every ounce of his betrayal and anger into his grip. It wasn't until Callum's body went limp beneath him that the red mist began to clear from his vision. Slowly, horrifyingly, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Terence released his grip and scrambled backwards, his hand shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the motionless form of his stepson. The aftermath of Callum's death plunged the Blackwood household into a nightmare of panic, guilt, and desperate decision-making. Terence, his clothes spattered with blood, in his mind reeling, stared at the lifeless body of his stepson as Ivy's hysterical sobs filled the room. "We have to call the police," Ivy choked out between gasps, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Terence cut her off, his tone shifting from shock to a cold, calculated Callum that chilled Ivy to her core. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "This was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident, but if the police come now, they won't see it that way. They'll destroy our family, our lives, everything we've built." Ivy stared at her father, barely recognizing the man before her. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "We need to clean this up," Terence replied, his mind already racing through scenarios. "Your mother can never know what really happened here. Do you understand?" For a moment, Ivy looked as though she might refuse. But then, whether out of shock, fear, or some twisted sense of loyalty, she nodded. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Terence, drawing on skills he never knew he possessed, methodically erased all traces of the struggle from Ivy's room. Flood-stained carpets were torn up, furniture rearranged, and incriminating items bagged for disposal. Ivy, still in a state of shock, followed her father's instructions mechanically. She scrubbed surfaces, laundered clothes, and helped move Callum's body, wrapped in a tarp, to the garage. As twilight descended on Maple Grove, Terence made a series of phone calls to his secretary, cancelling all appointments for the next few days due to a family emergency. To Lorelei, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than guilt, asking if she'd heard from Callum. To the local police, reporting his stepson missing, his tone a masterclass in worried parental concern. When Lorelei returned home, she found Terence and Ivy seated in the living room, their faces graved. Terence spun a tale of Callum storming out after an argument, of unanswered calls and growing worry. Ivy, her eyes red-rimmed from tears that were all too real, cooperated her father's story with a nod as night fell. The Blackwood house became a hub of anxious activity. Friends and neighbors, alerted to Callum's disappearance, arrived with casseroles and words of support. Police officers came and went, taking statements and assuring the family that they were doing everything possible to locate the missing young man. Through it all, Terence maintained his facade of concerned stepfather. His arm around a distraught Lorelei, his voice steady as he answered questions and thanked well-wishers. Only Ivy, watching her father with a mixture of fear and disbelief, knew the terrible truth that lay behind his performance. As the last visitors departed, and Lorelei finally succumbed to exhaustion, Terence pulled Ivy aside. "Remember," he murmured, "this is to protect our family, Ivy." Trapped in a nightmare of her own making, could only nod, sealing their pact of silence. As days stretched into weeks, with no sign of the young man, the initial worry gave way to darker speculations. Detective Elias Thorne, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. A methodical and perceptive investigator, Thorne had seen his fair share of missing persons cases, but something about this one nagged at his instincts. His first formal interview with the Blackwood family took place in their immaculate living room. The atmosphere heavy with tension, barely masked by Southern hospitality. Lorelei, her eyes red-rimmed and hands clasping a barely touched cup of tea, recounted the last time she had seen her son. Thorne's gaze shifted to Terence, noting the man's composed demeanor. "Mr. Blackwood, you reported having an argument with Callum the day he disappeared. Can you tell me more about that?" Terence's response was measured, rehearsed to perfection in the dark hours of sleepless nights. "It was nothing serious," he explained. "Just a disagreement about Callum's career plans. I wanted him to consider joining the family business, but he was set on pursuing his own path. I may have pushed too hard, and you, Miss Blackwood?" he asked, turning to Ivy. "Did you witness this argument?" Ivy, her face a mask of carefully cultivated grief, shook her head. "I was at work. When I got home, Callum was already gone." As the interview progressed, Thorne probed gently but persistently, noting the family's reactions. Lorelei's genuine distress, Terence's controlled responses, and Ivy's withdrawn demeanor all painted a complex picture that the detective couldn't quite decipher. In the days that followed, Thorne and his team delved deeper into Callum's life. They interviewed friends, colleagues from his internship, and even ex-girlfriends. A portrait emerged of a young man with ambition, charm, and no apparent reason to vanish without a trace. Yet as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies began to surface. Callum's phone record showed no outgoing calls or messages on the day of his disappearance. His car, found parked at a local trailhead, yielded no useful evidence. And most puzzlingly, none of his friends corroborated the story of plans to meet up on the day he vanished. As Detective Thorne penned another lead to the growing caseport in the precinct, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key to this mystery lay within the walls of their house. As weeks turned into months, the facade of normalcy at the Blackwood residence began to crack under the weight of their shared secret. Terence threw himself into work with renewed vigor, his aggressive expansion of development raising eyebrows in local business circles. Lorelei's once vibrant social life withered as she retreated into a shell of grief and confusion. And Ivy, haunted by the dual specters of loss and complicity, withdrew from friends and studies. Alike, it was Ivy who first showed signs of breaking under the strain. Her nights were plagued by vivid nightmares, her days by a guilt that threatened to consume her. The sight of her father going about his life as if nothing had happened filled her with a mixture of awe and revulsion. One particularly bad night, after waking from a dream of Callum's accusing eyes, Ivy found herself in the kitchen, a glass of water trembling in her hand. She didn't hear Lorelei's enter until her stepmother spoke, making her jump. "Can't sleep either?" Lorelei softly, her own face etched with the lines of chronic insomnia. Something in Lorelei's gentle tone, so reminiscent of Callum, broke through Ivy's carefully constructed walls. Before she could stop herself, words began to spill out. Disjointed at first. Then in a torrent of confession, Lorelei listened, her face a canvas of shifting emotions. Disbelief, horror, and finally a devastating understanding. When Ivy finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, Lorelei did something unexpected. She pulled her stepdaughter into a tight embrace. Elle knew, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Elle knew about you and Callum. Elle should have said something, should have stopped it. This is my fault too. As dawn broke over Maple Grove, they made a pact of their own, to confront Terrance and bring the truth to light. Terrance's reaction to their united front was explosive, his carefully maintained composure shattered, as he raged against their betrayal. His words a toxic mix of threats and pleas for understanding. It was in this moment of unguarded fury that Detective Thorne, arriving for a follow-up interview, overheard the damning confession through the open window of his unmarked car. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Police swarmed the Blackwood residence, securing the scene and separating the family members for questioning. Terrance, realizing the game was up, retreated into stony silence, requesting a lawyer. Ivy and Lorelei, however, unburdened by their confession, provided full statements. As the truth came to light, the community of Maple Grove reeled from the revelations. The illicit relationship between step-siblings, Lorelei's silent knowledge, and Terrance's fatal outburst painted a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and lies. In the midst of the chaos, Detective Thorne focused on the grim task at hand. With Terrance's reluctant cooperation, Callum's body was recovered from its hasty grave in a remote wooded area. The discovery brought a measure of closure to Lorelei, even as it sealed the case against her husband. The case against Terrance Blackwood seemed airtight, built on physical evidence and corroborating testimonies, yet as the trial approached, a new development threatened to upend the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative amidst the mountain of evidence being processed. A forensic technician made a startling discovery. DNA found under Callum's fingernails didn't match Terrance's profile. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male contributor. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detective Thorne, has certainty shaken, ordered a re-examination of all evidence. As the team delved deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. The angle of bruising on Callum's neck suggested a left-handed attacker, while Terrance was right-hand. Fibers found on the body didn't match those from the Blackwood home. Pressure mounted on the prosecution as these findings came to light. The defense, sensing an opportunity, pushed for all charges against Terrance to be dropped. However, the judge ruled that given the confessions and circumstantial evidence, the trial would proceed. Ivy and Lorelei, their united front beginning to crack under the strain of uncertainty, found themselves questioning their own memories of that fateful day. Had they been too quick to accept Terrance's guilt, blinded by their own complicity in the events leading up to Callum's death? As the trial date loomed, all parties involved grappled with the implications of this new information. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex than anyone had initially believed. In the courtroom, battle lines were drawn with both prosecution and defense, preparing to argue their interpretations of the increasingly convoluted evidence. The courtroom was packed on the day Terrance Blackwood was scheduled to take the stand. The air thrummed with tension as he was sworn in, his once commanding presence diminished by months in custody. As questioning began, Terrance's responses were measured, his demeanor calm, until the defense attorney broached the subject of the new DNA evidence. Terrance's composure cracked, his eyes darting to where Ivy sat in the gallery. In that moment, something seemed to break within him. To the shock of everyone present, he began to speak, his words pouring out in a torrent of confession, but not the one anyone expected. "I didn't kill Callum," Terrance declared, his voice raw with emotion, "but I am responsible for his death." He went on to describe the events of that day, but with a crucial difference. When he had walked in on Ivy and Callum, he admitted he had indeed been enraged. But it was Ivy, in a panic to protect her lover and their secret, who had lashed out violently. "I walked in and saw them together," Terrance recounted, his words echoing in the stunned silence of the courtroom. I was angry, yes, but before I could even speak, Ivy grabbed the paperweight. She struck Callum again and again. By the time I pulled her off, it was too late. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Terrance described how, in a moment of paternal instinct, he had decided to protect his daughter. He had sent a hysterical Ivy to clean herself up, while he staged the scene to implicate himself, believing he could better weather the storm of a police investigation. I never imagined it would go this far, he concluded, tears streaming down his face. I was trying to protect my little girl, but I see now that I've destroyed us all. As Terrance's words hung in the air, all eyes turned to Ivy. Her face had drained of color, her body rigid with shock. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she could only manage a barely audible whisper. It's true. In the gallery, Lorelei collapsed into silent sobs. The full weight of her family's destruction finally too much to bear. Detective Thorne, his case shattered but his instincts vindicated, began the mental process of reconstructing the investigation. As Terrance was led from the stand, the courtroom remained in stunned silence, grappling with this final devastating twist in a case that had already defied expectations at every turn. The revelation of Ivy's culpability and Terrance's false confession threw the trial into disarray. The judge declared a mistrial and both prosecution and defense scrambled to reassess their strategies in light of the new information. Ivy was immediately taken into custody. Her bail hearing scheduled for the following week, the prosecution, caught off guard by the turn of events, requested time to review the evidence and potentially file new charges against both Ivy and Terrance. Ivy's defense team quickly began building a case around temporary insanity and crime of passion, emphasizing her youth and the shocking circumstances that led to her actions. They also didn't hesitate to shine a light on the questionable dynamics within the Blackwood household that had allowed the relationship between step-siblings to develop unchecked. The trials of Ivy Blackwood and Terrance Blackwood, though separate, were inextricably linked in the public consciousness. Ivy's trial came first, a somber affair that saw the once vibrant young woman appearing pale and withdrawn in the defendant's box. Her defense team, as planned, pursued a strategy of temporary insanity, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of forbidden love and the fear of discovery. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Ivy as a calculating individual who had engaged in an illicit relationship and then committed murder to keep it hidden. They emphasized the brutality of the attack and Ivy's subsequent participation in the cover-up. Key testimony came from Lorelei, who spoke of her suspicions about Ivy and Callum's relationship and her regret at not intervening. Her words delivered through tears seemed to sway some jurors but alienate others who saw her in action as complicity after days of deliberation. The juries in both trials returned with their verdicts, bringing the legal saga of the Blackwood family to its conclusion. Ivy Blackwood was found guilty of second-degree murder, with the jury rejecting the insanity plea, but acknowledging the crime's unpremeditated nature, the judge taking into account Ivy's age in the unusual circumstances of the case. Sentence turned to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. After 12 years, Terrance Blackwood was found guilty on charges of obstruction of justice and filing a false report. The judge, noting the unique circumstances and Terrance's eventual confession, sentenced him to 5 years in prison, with 2 years suspended. As the Blackwoods were led from the courtroom for the last time, Maple Grove began the long process of healing and reflection, grappling with the knowledge that even in the most seemingly perfect communities, darkness can lurk behind closed doors.